So this is another little video that I'm going to make to show one of these difficult little tasks. What I am doing is I'm cutting in the corners of this slot. I routed this slot with a slotting cutter, which has a 2-inch diameter cutter. It's 3/16 of an inch deep, but the slotting cutter can't get all the way into the corners, so we have curved surfaces here which define the depth that it could cut to. I need the slot to be 3/16 of an inch deep all the way into the corner. And so the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to chop it out with an 1/8 of an inch chisel. And I don't really have anything to guide it except for the existing edges of the slot, the routed slot. So this surface is end grain, and this is long grain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, well, I should say, first of all, I should show you that here is a piece of 1/8 inch steel that I've clamped in the slot, and that's defining the bottom of this end of the cut here. It's 3/16 of an inch down from this corner, because the router wasn't able to even cut that to full depth. But we'll see how that works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the slot itself as a guide. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to start chopping the end grain up here. This is a sloping surface, so I'm actually going to go back up and start taking cross grain cuts, paring cuts across the end grain, taking very shallow little cuts here. And as I trying to get them somewhere near the depth that I need. We'll have to go over this. Now the 1/8 of an inch chisel is slightly less wide overall than the actual slot, which is good because it means I'm not wrecking the edges of the slot, but it also means that the chisel tends to jam because it leaves a little bit of wood on either side, and the bevels of the edge bevels of the chisel tend to jam in there. So something to keep in mind: the further down I go, the more it wants to jam. Again, I'm using the slot as a guide. I'm just going to start by taking cuts down to the corner. Okay, now we've got some waste in there we've got to get out. So now I'm going to take a wide chisel and use it to define the edges of the slot. I can lay this against the edges of the routed slot up above and carefully cut in on either side to start to define the edges of the slot. Now I can take a downwards with the grain cut and clear out a little bit more of that waste and start checking it for depth. Up here where the router did the work, it's 3/16 of an inch deep, and I'm almost to full depth already down near the corner, so that's good. I'm using the back of the chisel as a guide, just to try to make a nice straight bottom to that slot. Okay, so now we're down into the corner there. So at this point I'm going to continue on from this side, paring across the grain, taking very shallow cuts. That's really the key when you're working across end grain, when you're paring, is to take very, very shallow cuts. Fortunately, with an 1/8 of an inch chisel, you don't have an awful lot of resistance, so it's not too difficult. Now I'm going to gradually deepen this slot, this side of the slot. I've got a lot of waste in there. So again, I'm going to take my wider chisel and now I've got kind of the same problem down below. I'm just going to clear some of this waste out. Now I have to take the wide chisel and work this way to widen out the part that I've just pared, and it's gonna take a few cuts to really define it. Work in both directions, being careful not to tip the chisel and cut the edges of the groove too wide, because the waste is all down in the bottom of the slot, and it's all sort of a matter of watching carefully what you're doing. Alright, I can deepen it some more. Now the other thing I have to keep an eye on though is that this piece of steel, which I have in the slot, is held by a couple of clamps, but there's still nothing but friction that's holding it there, so it has a tendency to want to slide along the groove. It hasn't moved yet, so that's good. When you're working with a chisel, there's a tendency to lever against that steel and move it, in which case you might end up with a slot too deep. Fortunately, so far it's staying put. Okay, so there's the groove. I may have gone a little extra deep on the inside end of that, but not enough to worry about. Okay, now I just have to clean that up. A little bit wide chisel. Make sure that edges of the slot are as wide as they need to be. I'm going from this side too. So that needs to a little bit. Okay, just going to come down this way, take off that chip, and this way, cut it off. And double check the depth. That looks good. That looks good. Yep. Okay. So there it is. That's the corner cut in, and I'm ready to make the pieces to fit the slot. Already done this one, so that's the whole corner.